I remember the first time I stepped into that hotel. The sign was faded, the kind of white that had long lost its brightness, and the parking lot was empty except for one lone, humming streetlight. Fog curled around the edges of the building like a slow breath, and the air smelled faintly of wet carpet and forgotten linen. The lobby was quiet, almost too quiet, save for the faint static of an old radio somewhere behind the front desk. Each creak of the floorboards felt amplified, echoing against the high ceilings as if the walls themselves were listening. I thought I was alone, yet shadows move where light shouldn't reach. A flicker of pale light traced the edges of the corridor ahead, revealing a door that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. That's when I saw it, a silhouette that didn't belong. The hotel smelled of dust and old wood. The air was thick, heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. A pale light flickered over the lobby's worn carpet, casting shadows that trembled like thin smoke. I stepped inside. The door groaned behind me. It was quieter than I expected, almost too quiet. Soft lights hovered over the furniture. The edges of each chair blurred in the dim. Something whispered, barely a sound, right behind my ear. I froze. No one was there, but the hum of life seemed to pulse through the walls. A faint vibration under my feet. The glass doors reflected the lobby perfectly, except in the corner, someone or something stood watching me. I blinked. The figure vanished. Dust shifted across the floor with the slightest draft. I felt it brush my ankles like a cold breath. The lobby stretched unnaturally. The corners of the room seemed farther than they should be. A shadow leaned along the far wall. It didn't belong to the furniture. It moved without a source. I held my breath. It didn't vanish when I looked straight at it. Soft footsteps, mine or something else. They echoed too long, fading, returning, as if the lobby was stretching time itself. A faint rustling passed across the ceiling, or maybe under it. I ran my hand over the counter. Cold, smooth, unfamiliar. I could feel the grooves of old scratches, as if someone had been tracing them over decades. A faint hum vibrated through the wood. The light flickered again, and for a moment, I saw a movement in the reflection of the glass doors. A figure, closer this time, still silent, still pale. It never blinked. A soft sigh brushed against my ear. I thought I imagined it. The smell of old carpets and faint ozone lingered. The lobby hummed quietly, like it had secrets it wasn't ready to share. I tried to take a step forward. The floor seemed to shift slightly under my weight. A shadow leaned further, stretching along the wall, moving toward me in slow, impossible ways. And then it stopped. I stood alone, or so I thought. The whispering began again, soft, playful, almost curious. It moved around me, under the counter, behind the chairs. The light flickered once more, and I caught the reflection again. Someone, or something, smiled behind the glass. I wasn't breathing. It didn't move forward. It didn't disappear. I wanted to leave, but my feet refused. The hum of the lobby wrapped around me, gentle, insistent, pulling me into its quiet. The shadows grew longer, stretching toward the corners of my vision. The furniture seemed to lean in slightly, listening, waiting. I whispered to myself, try to hear my own voice over the lobby's soft breathing. It sounded strange, thin, like it belonged to someone else. The reflection in the glass shifted again. The figure was closer. It tilted its head, and the faintest whisper pressed into my ear. Stay? The lobby hummed around me. The air felt thicker now, almost liquid. I could smell the old more strongly, the faint tang of metal from somewhere unseen. And then silence. Only the pale light remained, flickering lazily over the dust and the shadows. The reflection was gone. I finally moved, but the lobby didn't end. It stretched on, empty, breathing, waiting. Soft footsteps behind me, always behind me. The elevator smelled faintly metallic. Cold steel pressed against my fingertips. The doors gleamed under pale fluorescent light, too bright, too still. I stepped inside. The floor hummed beneath my shoes. The buttons lit up on their own, one after another, like the elevator was deciding where to take me. The doors closed slowly. A shiver rolled up my spine. No one else was inside. I could feel the walls breathing. The elevator moved, not smoothly. It dipped slightly, then rose as if hesitant. Each floor took longer than the last. The numbers glowed faintly, then vanished. A soft hum echoed from the metal corners. I leaned closer. It was layered, quiet, almost a whisper. I thought I heard rustling behind the paneling. Tiny shifts like nail scraping. The air was cold, but heavy, like it had been holding its breath for decades. I touched the walls. Smooth, cold, almost wet. I sensed eyes, from the corners, from the reflection in the steel, watching me. Curious, patient. A faint static buzz, layered with a hum, growing thinner, then thick again. It pressed into my chest. A weight of waiting. The elevator jolted lightly. I steadied myself. The lights flickered. And in that pause, I thought I saw movement. A shadow leaning in one corner. It vanished when I blinked. I pressed a button myself. It glowed faintly under my finger. The elevator obeyed, but slower than it should. Each floor rolled beneath me like a dream stretched too long. The hum deepened, as if the walls were listening to me breathe. Cold seeped through the seams of the metal. I could smell ozone, faint and sharp, like electricity waiting. The corners held shapes that weren't quite shadows, but shifted when I looked directly. Time felt wrong. The elevator moved too slowly, then jerked as if resisting. The lights flickered again. The hum thinned to a whisper, then returned, layered and persistent. I noticed my reflection in the polished wall. It wasn't mine. The eyes behind mine were darker, watching from a place I couldn't reach. I turned. Nothing. The buttons flashed again. Unbidden. One floor after another. I didn't press them. They moved me through the building as if someone or something knew where I was going, saw footsteps or maybe the echo of my own, followed me in a confined space. They never reached me, but never faded either. I leaned against the wall. Cold, solid, but it trembled slightly beneath my hand. The hum carried whispers now, almost like a dialogue with itself. I couldn't understand the words. I didn't want to. The elevator slowed. The doors opened somewhere unfamiliar. No lobby, no floor I recognized. Just a corridor, pale light stretching endlessly. I could feel the hum pressing outward, as if the elevator hadn't let me go. I stepped forward. The air smelled faintly of dust and metal. The silence that followed felt alive. Waiting, watching. I looked back. The elevator doors were gone. Only smooth steel where they had been. The hum faded slowly, leaving the space empty and yet not. A soft vibration ran through the floor beneath me. I shivered. The corridor stretched into shadow. The pale light flickered once, and then only silence. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and old carpet. The lamps cast pale pools of light that barely reached the corners. It was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ventilation, low and steady like a watchful breath. A man checked in that evening, tall, pale with a slow smile. His footsteps echoed softly along the marble floor. I thought I would remember him leaving, but I didn't. The key card stayed in the lock. Cold metal, still warm from his hand. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, as if waiting for something or someone. I walked the halls later. The carpet muffled my own steps. Sheets rustled behind closed doors. Muffled steps answered, but no one appeared. I paused. A draft rolled through the corridor, carrying the faint scent of soap and something older, like leather left in the sun too long. The hum of the lights above seemed deeper here, as if aware of my presence. Curiosity tugged at me. I found his room. The door was closed. I pressed my hand against it. Cold, unyielding. The key card still rested in the lock. I slipped it in. The door opened easily. The room was empty. No luggage. No bed pressed with body. Only sheets, pale and trembling as if breathing. A faint rustle moved across the floor. My fingers brushed the quilted blanket. It shivered, then stillness. The hum of the hall grew louder, but the room remained silent and alone. I stepped back. Soft footsteps returned. They weren't mine. They circled the hall outside the room. No shadow moved. No figure. I leaned closer to the doorway. The air smelled faintly metallic. A whisper of something pressing against the walls, as if the corridor itself was listening. I could feel eyes from the corners, watching from angles impossible to see. The bed sheets shifted again. A breath seemed to pass over my skin. I imagined movement, a figure at the edge of the room, vanishing when I blinked. I walked the hallway slowly. Each door I passed hummed with life. The soft footsteps trailed behind me. Never close, never leaving. Always there. The key card stayed in the lock. Still, cold, waiting, like a heart paused between beats. I returned to the lobby. It seemed quieter now. The soft hum lingered. A shadow moved across the far wall. Gone when I blinked. I thought of the man. Where had he gone? The echo of his steps lingered in the air, but no one remembered him leaving. And the corridor, the rooms, the lobby, all seemed to hold their breath, as if guarding a secret I was not meant to know. I stepped outside briefly. The night pressed cold against my skin. Fog rolled through the streets. I could still feel the soft footsteps following me in memory, trailing behind each heartbeat. The door closed behind me. The hum faded slowly. The lobby remained still. The sheets lay empty, and the key card glimmered faintly in the lock, like it had been waiting all along. The air was thick with cold and stillness. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and something older, like damp would left to age alone. I stepped into a corridor I didn't recognize. The walls stretched higher than they should. The carpet muffled my footsteps, yet I felt the floor shift beneath my weight. Candles ignited along the length of the hall. One by one, soft flames flickering without touch, casting pale light that danced across the wallpaper. Shadows moved on their own rhythm, slow, swaying, curling around corners and doors. I wanted to step closer, but my feet refused to obey entirely. The air pressed against me, heavy and still, as if filled with things unspoken. I could smell faint smoke in the candles, but also something metallic, sharp, lingering beneath it. A soft sob echoed behind the door. The wood was smooth, dark, unfamiliar. The sound trembled through the hall. I pressed my ear to it. Cold seeped into my skin. The corridor seemed to bend. The pale candlelight stretched further than it should. Shadows twined together, and I could feel eyes watching from their angles. The air thinned briefly, then thickened again as if the hallway itself exhaled. Soft rustling passed over the carpet. I thought I felt fingertips brush my arm. I moved forward slowly. The flickering candles cast more shadows and light. Each flame trembled as if reacting to my presence. I smelled wax melting and the faint tang of something damp. The sob continued, faint and distant. It pressed into my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. The door remained closed, and yet the sound didn't stop. I tried to glance down the hallway. It seemed endless, the walls curling slightly inward. Candles continued to light themselves ahead of me, casting light over things I could not yet see. I paused in the middle of the hall. The hum of silence pressed against my ears. Shadows swayed closer, almost touching, almost alive. The sobbing faded. Only the soft flicker of the candles remained. I could feel the air brushing my cheeks, smelling faint smoke, damp, and something like old linen. I stepped back. The corridor seemed longer than before. The doors shifted slightly, and a breeze, impossible quiet, rippled through the hall. The pale light trembled. Shadows swirled slowly, like they were breathing along with me. I didn't move further. I only listened. The hallway hummed softly, alive with what it had seen, and kept silent. The candlelight continued down the corridor. Flames flickered in rhythm with shadows. The door with the sob was still closed, and the hall stretched on, endless, breathing around me in quiet dread. The key was cold in my hand, heavier than I expected. The metal pressed against my palm. I stepped toward the door. It loomed faintly under pale hallway light. The carpet muffled my steps. The air smelled faintly of wax and something older, dust, linen, maybe time itself. The door creaked as I turned the key. Slow, reluctant, a sigh of hinges, stretched thin and drawn out. I pressed the door open. The room looked pristine, too clean, too quiet. Everything was in its place. But something was wrong. Mirrors lined the walls. I saw my reflection. And then I didn't. Movements that weren't mine flickered across the glass. Shadows leaned, bent, twisted along the edges. The bed was made neatly, sheets smooth, untouched. A faint rustle shifted across the pillow. Or maybe the air. The hum of silence pressed against my ears. I tried to remember how I arrived, but the memory slipped. The hallway I'd walked vanished. I was here, and nowhere else. I stepped further into the room. The carpet felt too soft under my feet. Each step pressed a faint echo, though the room held its own stillness. The mirrors continued to move. A hand, mine, lifted the frame. A shadow followed it. A blink, and the shadow leaned slightly differently. Alive. Curious. I breathed slowly, felt the cold key pressing still in my hand. The faint scent of metal lingered with the wax. The wall seemed to lean slightly closer. The room was observing, or maybe welcoming. The hum of silence shifted. Soft vibrations pressed against the soles of my feet. A rustle of fabric, linen, curtains, air passed by my ear. And the mirrors, they watched with movements I could not control. I turned to the window. Pale light spilled in, casting a faint glow over furniture that seemed familiar, yet wrong. Shadows danced slowly across the floor. Time felt uneven. I felt stretched, pulled slightly apart. I walked to the bed. Fingers brushed the sheets. Cold, smooth. The quilt trembled faintly beneath my touch. Or maybe it was the room itself breathing. I glanced again at the mirrors. A movement I did not make stood at the far edge of the room. It tilted its head slowly, watching me, not threatening. Curious. I tried to retrace my steps in my mind. Nothing. No hallway. No lobby. No footsteps leading here. The key still pressed cold in my palm. I let it drop onto the dresser. It thudded softly against wood, yet the sound seemed to linger in the room long after it fell. I sat on the bed briefly. The air was heavy, thick with things unsaid. The hum, the shadows, the faint rustle of sheets, all pressed against my senses gently, insistently. I looked around one last time. Everything was in place, yet nothing felt real. The mirrors reflected me, but not me alone, and the room waited, patient. The stairwell smelled of damp wood and cold stone. Fog curled between the banisters like slow-moving smoke. It clung to the air, thick and soft, brushing against my face. I stepped onto the first stair. My shoes pressed against the wood, but the sound barely traveled. Each step muffled, swallowed by the fog. Pale light glowed under the doors along the landing. Soft, uneven. The color of candle wax left too long. It seeped into the mist, illuminating shadows that moved slightly as if breathing. The air was heavy, almost liquid. I could smell faint ozone mingling with damp carpet. A draft pressed against my neck, and I felt something brush past my shoulder. I froze. The fog rippled as if it had weight, stretching around the stairwell in slow folds. A soft hum pressed beneath the walls, low and constant, like a patient heartbeat. I stepped higher. The stairs seemed to extend beyond reason. Each landing lingered longer than the last. The fog shifted with my movement, curling around my ankles, pressing lightly against my skin. The doors along the stairs glowed faintly. Some lights flickered. Shadows stretched from the frames, twisting against the pale glow. It felt as if the stairwell itself were leaning in to watch. Soft rustling passed behind me. I turned. The fog had thickened. No one was there, only the lingering press of air against my back. The banisters were cold under my hands. I traced the wood, feeling small scratches and grooves, as if years of unseen fingers had passed over it. The smell of aged polish mingled with something metallic, sharp and lingering. The hum deepened slightly. It moved in rhythm with my heartbeat. The fog swirled. Shadows stretched across the steps, bending toward me. I tried to count the stairs, but they twisted strangely, longer than they should have been. Each step carried me forward, but forward into what? A faint sigh brushed past my ear. Cold, yet soft, as though exhaling secrets. The fog seemed to respond, curling around the landing, clinging, watching. The light under the doors pulsed gently. It highlighted shadows that leaned closer, folding across the stairs, then retreating slightly when I moved. I stopped midway. The fog pressed against my chest now. My breath turned visible, and I could smell the dampness of stone beneath the mist. I sensed eyes in the corners of the stairwell, watching, patient. I continued upward slowly. Every step sounded hollow in my mind, though nothing reached my ears. A shiver ran across my arms. The fog brushed again, soft and fleeting. At the top, a final door glowed faintly. Its light spilled into the mist, casting shadows that twisted oddly across the banisters. I could feel the stairwell holding its breath, waiting. I reached the landing. The fog swirled gently at my feet. No footsteps followed. Yet I wasn't alone. The stairwell exhaled slowly, and the pale light dimmed. Shadows folded back into corners. The hum faded, leaving only the mist, soft, lingering, alive with quiet patience. The hallway smelled faintly of old varnish and dust. Pale light spilled from sconces along the walls. It was quiet, almost too quiet, except for a soft hum vibrating through the walls. It was low, persistent, like a lullaby I wasn't supposed to hear. I pressed my hand to plaster. The hum shifted under my fingers, soft, insistent, almost breathing. I blinked. The furniture along the hall moved slightly. Chairs leaned inward. A table twisted gently. I caught it out of the corner of my eye. Then stillness. The floorboards above whispered faint scratches. Not loud, but deliberate. A rhythm I couldn't follow. Soft, uneven, patient. I stepped forward. The carpet pressed under my shoes, but it felt too thick, too yielding. The hum pressed into my chest. I could smell faint metal mingle with wax. The walls seemed closer now, stretching, leaning ever so slightly. Shadows gathered along corners and edges, folding like smoke. I glanced at the chair. It had shifted again. I didn't move it. I didn't touch it. And yet it leaned slightly toward me, as if drawn by my presence. The hum pulsed, slow, rhythmic. I could feel it in my chest, in my fingertips against the wall. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't safe either. The scratching continued above me. Fingernails or claws. Soft, precise, moving across floorboards that creaked faintly. It echoed to the hall, layered with a hum, like something unseen tracing my path. I pressed my ear to the wall. The hum vibrated stronger, a quiet lullaby pressing into my thoughts. The plaster was warm beneath my hand. A faint rustle brushed past my sleeve. I stepped further. The hall seemed longer now. Each sconce flickered faintly. Shadows twisted differently in every corner. The floorboards above hummed faintly with the rhythm of the unseen steps. I reached the far end. The hum softened slightly, then pulsed again. The furniture had shifted once more. A chair now faced the wall. An open drawer moved slightly, as if breathing in time with a lullaby. I could feel eyes watching from the corners, from the walls themselves. I didn't dare look directly. The hum pressed into me, soft, patient, alive. A faint breeze moved through the hall, not from a window, not from a vent. It pressed against my cheek, carrying the faint smell of old wood and wax. I stopped. The hum softened. The floorboards above fell silent. Shadows settled into corners. The furniture remained still, almost reverent. I exhaled slowly. The walls seemed to lean back slightly. The pale light flickered once, casting shadows that lingered longer than they should. And the hum was still there, soft, low, whispering, as if waiting for me to move again. The hallway smelled of old wood and dust. Pale light spilled faintly from a crack under a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small, crooked, almost hidden. I touched the handle. Dust rose in the air like tiny ghosts. The wood was cold beneath my fingers. It creaked softly when I pushed. Inside, the air was heavier. Still, the smell of aged paper and faint mildew lingered. It pressed against my nose, thick and unmoving. Rooms stretched off the hallway, frozen in time. Chairs faced corners, as if watching shadows that weren't there. The floors were covered in a thin layer of dust. Soft footprints had formed in the corners. Or maybe they hadn't. Clocks hung on the walls. All stopped at 3:07. The hands tilted just slightly, as if frozen mid-breath. I tried to blink. When I opened my eyes, the room hadn't changed. The stillness pressed in. The light was pale, flickering faintly across the cracked plaster. Shadows pooled in corners, leaning slightly toward me. I could hear faint rustling, or perhaps I imagined it, a quiet whisper of air moving through broken window frames. I stepped further inside. The floors felt uneven beneath my feet. Cold would press against my shoes. The dust rose lightly with each step. It smelled faintly metallic, like something old and patient waiting. Chairs shifted slightly when I looked away. When I turned back, they faced the corners again. The hum of silence seemed to thicken. The air pressed closer to my chest. I ran a hand along the table. Cold, smooth, polished long ago. A layer of dust coated it, and my fingers left faint marks behind. It felt as though the room had noticed. The hallway stretched endlessly. Rooms repeated themselves, mirrored in design, yet each felt slightly wrong. The walls leaned ever so slightly inward, folding around me. I stopped at the doorway. The light was dimmer here. The air smelled faintly of wax and decay. I could feel faint vibrations through the floor, as if the building itself was breathing softly beneath me. I glanced at the clock. 3:07. The hands remained frozen. A low hum pressed against my ears. It was almost comforting, almost welcoming. The chairs in the room creaked faintly, not with weight, but with anticipation. Soft shadows stretched along the walls, folding around corners, leaning gently toward the center. I stepped back toward the hallway. The door closed softly behind me. The dust swirled faintly in the dim light. I could still smell the old wood and faint mildew, and the hum lingered, as if the wing itself hadn't forgotten me. The hallway outside was quieter now. Still, the pale light trembled slightly, casting long shadows that bent inward, folding over forgotten spaces I had left behind. And somewhere a clock ticked again, but not at 3:07. The room smelled faintly of cold stone and old glass. Pale light spilled through the windows, soft, uneven, barely reaching corners. I noticed the first reflection. A figure behind me, tall, still, silent. I turned. No one was there. Breath fogged the glass. Even though the room was cold, my own reflection seemed delayed, trailing me slightly as I moved. It blinked after I did. Every mirror, every window showed someone behind me, a pale shadow leaning closer than it should. I stepped forward. The floor was smooth, cold beneath my feet. Soft echoes of my steps lingered longer than they should. The hum of silence pressed against my ears. I blinked again. The figures shifted. A subtle tilt of the head, a sway of a shoulder. Movements mine and yet not mine. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the cold pressed against my fingertips as I traced the edge of a mirror. The reflection followed my touch, but slightly delayed. Soft whispers tickled the edges of my hearing. I couldn't understand them. I didn't want to. Shadows clung to the corners. The room felt smaller, then stretched wider in the blink of an eye. The mirrors multiplied the figures behind me. I counted 3, then 5, then more. I stopped counting. The glass fogged again. A handprint appeared, faint, trembling. Not mine. I reached out. It faded slowly beneath my fingers. I felt a soft brush against my shoulder. I didn't turn. The mirrors reflected the movement behind me anyway. Always behind me, always watching. I took a step back. The floorboard sighed faintly under my weight. The air shifted, carrying the scent of cold metal and old wax. The figures in the glass leaned slightly forward. Curious, patient. I pressed my hand against another pane. Cold, smooth. The reflection lagged slightly behind me. The window trembled, then stilled. I exhaled slowly. The fog drifted away. The figures lingered, faint, motionless, just at the edge of vision. I stepped away from the glass. The room returned to its quiet. Breathless, still, the pale light trembled against the walls. Shadows folded back into corners, and the reflections waited, patient, always behind me. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and cold stone. Pale light spilled along the walls, soft and uneven. I could feel the air pressing gently against my skin, thick with stillness. A figure appeared, uniformed, tall, silent. His face, I couldn't see it clearly, blurred, faded. Every time I tried to focus, he became less. He moved toward me without a sound. The carpet muted his steps completely, yet I felt each one vibrating faintly beneath my feet. I followed him instinctively. He led me down halls I didn't recognize, rooms I hadn't asked to see, each door slightly ajar, pale light spilling through. The air smelled faintly of old polish and dust. The hum of silence pressed against my ears, layered with soft creaks of doors shifting on their hinges. The figure paused. I paused. Our breaths seemed synchronized, though I knew he didn't breathe. A chair shifted as we passed. A faint rustle of fabric brushed the corner of my eye. The walls seemed to lean slightly inward, folding gently around the hallway. I glanced at him again, his face still unclear, like a memory half-formed. I tried to call out. No words came, only the soft press of air and the hum of quiet. The rooms we passed were empty, yet alive with presence. Beds neatly made, windows pale with moonlight. Furniture shifted slightly when I blinked. I sensed eyes from corners of the walls, from angles I couldn't quite see. And still, he moved silently, guiding me, patient, unfaltering. I blinked. He vanished. No sound, no shift in the air, only the soft echo of footsteps that had never really existed. The hallway stretched longer now. Doors repeated themselves, mirrored in design, each slightly different. The hum persisted. Soft, low, insistent. I breathed slowly. The air was cold, metallic with faint wax. The silence pressed against my chest. Every shadow leaned closer, folding into corners. I stepped into a room he had left open. Pale light illuminated chairs facing the walls. The floorboards creaked faintly beneath my shoes. A door at the far end was cracked, casting a triangle of light into the hall. I turned back. He was gone. I could feel the absence, a pull in the air where he had guided me. The carpet seemed flatter now, as though pressed down by unseen weight. I exhaled. The hum softened. Shadows swirled faintly across the walls. The hallway remained, empty, and yet not empty. I could still feel him there, watching, patient, guiding, waiting for me to move again. The key was cold in my pocket. I hadn't noticed it appear, only the sudden weight against my fingers. I climbed the narrow staircase slowly. Each step pressed lightly against the wood. The air smelled faintly of old paper and decay, dust thick and soft beneath my fingertips. The attic door loomed at the top. Cracked paint, warped wood. I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock gave a low sigh as I turned it. The door creaked open. A breath of cold air rushed past. Shadows clung to the rafters, stretching, folding, leaning against each other. Pale light spilled through a small window. Dust floated in the beams, glinting like tiny stars. The air tasted faintly metallic, mingled with the softness of old paper. The diary lay open on a table, its pages yellowed and brittle. The words on them were mine, or almost mine. Words I had never written. I stepped closer. The wooden floorboards groaned softly beneath my weight. The air pressed against my cheeks. The shadows shifted. As if acknowledging my presence, I ran a finger along the diary's edge. The paper crumbled faintly under my touch. A faint rustle of fabric moved across the attic, or perhaps it was the air shifting. The words seemed to rearrange themselves. Lines I didn't recognize slipped into sentences I couldn't recall forming. The diary trembled slightly beneath my hands. I looked around. The rafters were thick with shadow. Shapes leaned from the beams, elongated, stretching toward the small window. The air was still, yet full of expectation. I breathed slowly, fingers brushing the pages, feeling the slight roughness of aged paper. The hum of silence pressed in. It wrapped around me, folding the attic tighter, smaller. I glanced out the window. Pale light traced the edges of the rafters, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny phantoms. The shadows swirled faintly. The diary's words shimmered, reflecting light in shapes almost familiar. I stepped back. The attic seemed larger now, the rafters higher, the shadows stretching longer. A faint brush of air grazed my neck. I shivered. The key, still cold in my pocket. The diary lay open, waiting. The shadows folded into corners, leaning slightly toward me. The hum of quiet pressed beneath my feet. I could feel it watching, not with eyes, but with presence, patient, curious. I let my fingers hover above the diary one last time. The attic exhaled slowly. Dust settled. Shadows paused. And the key remained heavy, silent, a promise of things still unseen. The room smelled faintly of dust and stale air. Pale light filtered through blinds that moved on their own, though it creaked softly with each subtle shift. Morning never came. The light remained thin, cold, suspended. It stretched across the floor in pale stripes, cutting the room into shadow and glow. I watched the window. Silhouettes paced outside, leaning, swaying, shifting in rhythm I couldn't follow. I focused. They vanished. The shadows remained, waiting, patient. The blinds rattled gently. A soft draft whispered through the slats. I could smell faint wax and old paint. The air pressed against my skin, like a hand brushing lightly over my shoulder. I stepped closer. The floorboards hung beneath my feet. Each step swallowed in silence. The silhouettes returned, pacing slowly along the edge of the light. Not quite human, not quite still. I blinked. They vanished again. The light shifted, folding across the walls in sharp angles. I could hear faint rustling, as if air itself carried them through the room. The blinds tilted again, moving without my touch. Pale lines stretched across the floor. Shadows bent with them. I pressed my hand against the window frame. Cold, smooth, the metal trembled faintly beneath my fingers. I stepped back. The silhouettes were there again, leaning slightly, pacing in silence. I couldn't move without disturbing them, or without them noticing. The hum of the room grew faintly louder, soft, insistent, like a heartbeat pressed through the walls. I breathed slowly, the air heavy with dust and anticipation. I watched the light shift. A shadow lingered in the corner of my vision. When I looked directly, it was gone. The silhouettes outside moved closer to the glass. Then they receded, folding into nothing. I touched the blinds lightly. They responded, tilting slightly on their own. Pale lines cut the room in new patterns. The air pressed in, soft and heavy, alive with waiting. I stepped away. The silhouettes vanished once more. The light remained pale, unmoving. The hum faded slightly. The room exhaled. And still, the blinds moved. Pale stripes stretched across the floor. Shadows bent and folded. Morning never came. Only the quiet, the stillness, and the soft, patient silhouettes pacing just beyond my focus. The room smelled faintly of fabric and dust. Pale light spilled through a window, cutting the floor into thin stripes. The air felt heavy, pressing softly against my skin. A faint scratching came from beneath the bed. Slow, hesitant, it scraped lightly across wood or fabric. I couldn't tell. I leaned closer. The floorboards were cold beneath my palms. Dust swirled faintly as I moved. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in. I waited. Soft whispers drifted upward. My name, repeated, low, gentle, insistent. I peered under the bed. Nothing, only shadow, folding in corners. Still, the whispers continued. The sound of air brushing softly, rustling against unseen things. I pressed my ear closer. The whispers grew faintly clearer, carrying a strange familiarity. Not words I could understand, but the cadence, my name, over and over. A shiver ran along my spine. The blankets above me shifted faintly. The mattress creaked softly. I could feel the air tremble around the bed, like a heartbeat just beneath the floor. I straightened slowly. The scraping started again. Soft, patient, deliberate. It moved beneath the bed, circling, brushing. Not fast, not loud, but precise. The shadows beneath the bed seemed to pulse with it. I smelled faintly of cold wood and old fabric. The whispers pressing closer, their rhythm matching the scrape beneath the floorboards. I reached out, hand hovering over the darkness. It felt like the air itself trembled. A faint brush of something soft, something alive, against my fingers, then silence. I held my breath. The room seemed to tilt slightly, floorboards stretching longer, walls folding inward. The whispers returned, low, looping, calling me again and again. I exhaled slowly. The scratching stopped. The shadows beneath the bed remained still. Only the hum of silence pressed around me, soft, constant, patient. I pulled back. The pale light trembled slightly through the window. Dust floated lazily in the streaks of light. The whispers faded to a faint echo, as if waiting just beneath the floor. I stepped away. The bed remained. Shadows clung to the corners. The air smelled of fabric and faint wood. And somewhere beneath it all, the faint, deliberate rustling continued. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and cold wood. Pale light stretched along the floor, thin stripes cutting across dust motes. A mirror leaned against the wall, full length, the kind that seemed to absorb the air around it. I stepped closer. The hallway reflected wasn't the hallway I stood in. Doors appeared where none should be. Others vanished when I looked directly. Shadows shifted independently, leaning into corners before I could blink. I reached out to touch the glass. Cold, smooth, my fingers left no mark. Yet the reflection quivered slightly, as if the hallway itself breathed beneath the surface. I stepped back. A door appeared behind me in the reflection, its frame tilted slightly, the wood grain rippling faintly. I turned. The real hallway remained unchanged. The air smelled faintly metallic, a soft impress against my ears. The shadows in the mirrors swayed subtly, independently of the light or my movement. I leaned closer again. The floorboard beneath my feet whispered with faint creaks. The mirror reflected more than the hallway. Soft shapes at the edges, shapes that shifted when I blinked. A pale light stretched across the hallway in the glass. It didn't match the light behind me. Shadows pooled differently, leaning slightly forward, folding over themselves like they were alive. I moved along the hallway, the mirror following me in its own rhythm. Doors opened and closed without sound, corridors extending endlessly inside its surface. The reflection breathed a little slower than I did, a little colder. I touched the frame. The wood was cold beneath my palm. It vibrated faintly, almost imperceptibly, like it remembered my presence before I did. I blinked. The hallway and the mirror changed again. Shadows stretched taller, thinner. Doors vanished. A pale light moved across the floor in impossible angles. I stepped away. The air pressed softly against my chest. The hum lingered faintly, soft, persistent. The mirror remained, silent, patient. I breathed slowly. The reflections leaned faintly toward me. I could feel the hallway outside the glass trembling slightly, shadows folding and unfolding like the world itself was unsure of its shape. I stepped back once more. The mirror seemed to grow slightly taller. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my feet. A door appeared in the reflection, just beyond the far corner. I didn't move toward it. The hallway remained quiet, and the mirror waited. Cold, smooth, its surface a little too alive. Shadows stretched. Doors shifted. The light trembled. And I was alone, yet not alone, watching the hallway that existed only in glass. The lobby smelled faintly of wax and stale air. Pale light from high windows stretched across the floor. Dust floated lazily in the thin shafts. Trays appeared on the tables. Breakfast neatly arranged. Plates, silverware, a faint steam rising as though just served. I reached for one. It vanished. The air trembled softly where it had been. Cold, silent, and empty. Chairs shifted. Soft scratches along the floorboards. It was as if someone had just stood there, then vanished without a sound. I stepped closer to another tray. It appeared again, untouched. The smell of toast and faint butter hovered in the air. I reached out slowly. Again, nothing. The hum of silence pressed against the walls. The air felt thick, almost humid. I could taste the faint tang of metal in the room, as though the trays had left a trace behind. I stepped back. The chairs leaned slightly, angles unnatural, as if someone had just risen from the moments ago. No one was there. Trays flickered in and out of existence. Plates, glasses, silverware, all appearing briefly, then gone. The floorboards creaked faintly under my steps, soft echoes that didn't match my movements. I breathed slowly. The lobby seemed larger now. The shadows stretched along the walls, elongated by the pale light. The smell of faint smoke and wax hung in the corners. I reached for a chair. It shifted under my hand, though no weight pressed down on it. The hum of silence grew slightly louder, insistent, patient. Trays appeared again. I hesitated. The air trembled gently around them. The shadows moved slightly, stretching along the edges of tables and walls. I stepped away. The trays vanished. The chairs settled softly onto the floor. The room exhaled, heavy with the absence of what had been there. I watched the light shift across the floor. Dust motes drifted lazily. The hum faded. The lobby remained empty. Yet I knew, somehow, it was never truly alone. The room smelled faintly of aged wood and cold air. Pale light from the hallway spilled in through cracks in the doors. Dust motes drifted lazily in the thin beams. Above me, wooden floors creaked. Soft, deliberate, yet I could see no one walking there. The sound lingered, pressing against the ceiling. A faint hum joined it. Low, steady like the building itself was breathing. I pressed my palm against the wall. Cold, smooth, vibrating faintly under my touch. I glanced upward. A figure lingered at the edge of the railing, too still to be alive. Edges blurred slightly, like smoke against the pale light. I blinked. It shifted ever so slightly. Not stepping, not moving, just leaning, observing. The hum deepened, pressing against my ears. The floor beneath me seemed to tremble. Dust lifted from the boards, swirling in tiny eddies. I could smell faint varnish and old air press into silence. I took a step back. The figure remained, its outline fading whenever I tried to focus. Shadows stretched along the walls. They reached toward me softly, as if following the movement above. The hum continued, a soft rhythm beneath the ceiling. Each creak a question, each whisper a movement a warning. I held my breath, feeling the pulse of the building against my chest. I moved cautiously. The floorboards whispered beneath my steps. The figure shifted again, leaning slightly forward, its edges trembling like fog. I pressed my hand to the banister nearby. Cold, smooth, unyielding. A faint breeze moved across the hall. It carried the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. I looked up once more. The figure lingered, silent, impossible to touch, yet present, watching. I stepped away. The creaks above slowed. The hum faded slightly. The dust settled, drifting lazily in the pale light. The hallway remained quiet. The figure was gone. Only the faint tremble in the floorboards remained. The air pressed softly around me, warm and cold at once, and I knew someone or something had been watching, patient, just above. The hallway smelled faintly of varnish and old air. Pale light filtered through cracks in walls. Dust floated lazily in the shafts of light, swirling with every tiny movement. I heard it before I saw the door. A soft, deliberate melody, faint, delicate, like fingers brushing over ivory keys. The door was locked. The sound came from behind it, pressing gently against the hallway, inviting, impossible to ignore. I leaned closer. The notes repeated themselves. Each one lingered in the air, folding softly over itself. Dust motes lifted with every subtle vibration, dancing in the pale light. I circled the hallway. No matter where I moved, the music followed, faint, unrelenting, the same sequence over and over. I pressed my hand against the door. Cold, smooth. A faint vibration ran through the wood, matching the rhythm of the keys inside. I could smell the faint scent of old paper and polish, mingled with something sweeter, almost like wax. The notes trembled to the floor beneath me, soft, persistent, insistent. I stepped back. The hallway seemed longer now, shadows stretching along the walls, bending toward the source of the music. The melody filled every corner, pressing against my ears, soft and haunting. I traced the door with my fingers. The lock was old, rusted slightly. A faint chill rose from the wood, tickling my skin. The melody carried a faint echo of silence, stretching beyond the notes themselves. I moved slowly away, yet the music remained. Every step I took, it followed, folding softly around the hallway, pressing gently against the walls. I whispered my own name, and the melody shifted slightly, like it heard me. A single note lingered longer than before, hanging in the air, brushing softly against my skin. I could feel the air vibrate faintly, dust swirling lazily, edges of shadow trembling in rhythm with the keys. The room behind the door remained locked, yet somehow alive. I stepped away fully, the melody still echoing behind me. Pale light trembled across the floorboards. Shadows settled slightly. The air smelled faintly of polish and wood, haunting, patient. And somewhere beyond the door, the piano continued to play, softly, relentlessly, filling the empty hall with a quiet, impossible presence. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and cold air. Pale light from cracks in the doors stretched along the floor. Dust hovered in lazy swirls, caught in a faint glow. Keyholes dotted the corridor, small, dark, unassuming. Yet each seemed to hum softly, a vibration that brushed against my ears. I leaned closer to one. A whisper escaped. Names, dates. Secrets folded softly into the air. Some sounded familiar, like echoes of conversations I couldn't remember. I pressed my ear to another keyhole. A soft murmur of my own voice returned, distorted, stretched, layered with something wrong. It carried a faint metallic tang, like rust or old hinges turning slowly. The shadows along the walls trembled slightly. Each keyhole seemed alive, breathing in the silence. I could feel the faint vibration beneath my fingertips as I traced the edges of the locks. I moved down the hallway. Each keyhole whispered in turn. Dates I didn't recognize, names I shouldn't know. A soft hum of air brushed my cheek, warm, cold, impossible to place. I paused. The whispering grew subtle, persistent. A single note of my own voice lingered, folding into the shadows along the floorboards. Dust lifted slightly, swirling like tiny ghosts in the pale light. I pressed closer to another door. The wood was cold, smooth. The keyhole breathed against me, a soft exhale of sound, edges trembling like fog. The names and dates whispered faster now, layering over one another, folding the silence into a quiet tension. I pulled back. The hallway seemed to stretch. Shadows pressed gently against the walls, leaning toward the keyholes. A faint smell of wax and old paper drifted from the doors, warm, lingering, unsettling. I tried to step forward. A whisper caught my name, twisted, elongated, unfamiliar. My own breath echoed back to me, slightly wrong, slightly delayed. The air vibrated softly, pressing against my chest with each inhalation. I moved carefully. Each keyhole seemed to watch me, the whispers brushing against my ears, folding and unfolding in strange rhythms. Dust motes floated lazily, edges of shadow trembling faintly. I paused at the final door. Its keyhole whispered faintly. A date, a name, a secret I couldn't remember learning. The hallway was silent for a moment. Then my voice returned, stretched and soft, folding the space around me. I stepped back slowly. The whispers lingered, threading softly through the walls, pressing against the air like faint breath. The shadows settled. The hallway exhaled quietly, and I realized each keyhole had been listening and each had something to return. Patient, waiting, softly, endlessly, in the quiet of the darkened hall. The air smelled damp and cold, heavy with mist and the faint tang of stone. Pale light struggled through the thick fog, blurring edges of statues that stood silently. I stepped into the courtyard. My shoes pressed softly into the wet stone, each footstep muffled by the fog, as though the world itself swallowed sound. Shadows moved between the statues, slow, deliberate, shifting in ways that didn't belong to wind. I could feel them brushing past my peripheral vision, always gone when I turned to look directly. A faint laughter drifted through the mist. High, airy, like it belonged to someone small or something old. It echoed softly, pressing against the skin of my ears. The statues stared with cold, carved eyes. I imagined them shifting when I wasn't looking. The air was thick, heavy, coating my throat with damp chill. I moved closer to one of the figures. Its stone face seemed to tilt slightly, casting a shadow that didn't match the light. The fog wrapped around me, curling against my ankles like fingers. Another laugh floated past, softer this time, closer, though the courtyard remained empty. A faint scent of wet earth rose from the ground, mingling with the cold stone and mist. I walked slowly between the figures. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the cobblestones. The fog swirled with each step, hiding and revealing shapes I wasn't sure were there. I paused. The laughter was gone. A static hum pressed through the air, like the courtyard itself was holding its breath. I could feel the fog brushing my cheeks, damp and cold, as if warning me to move carefully. A shape flickered in the mist. Just a shadow or maybe a person. It vanished before I could focus, leaving only the thick silence behind. I traced my fingers along a stone balustrade. Cold, slick with moisture. The statue seemed to lean slightly, just enough to feel alive. The fog swirled around my legs, carrying faint hints of the laughter, like a memory pressed into the air. I took another step. The courtyard stretched wider than I remembered, the fog thicker, the shadows longer. A soft rustle brushed past me, cold fingers of air twisting around my arms. I stopped completely. The fog lay heavy over the ground, and the courtyard felt suspended, neither day nor night. Only the soft echo of distant laughter threaded through the mist. I exhaled slowly. The courtyard remained still, the statues frozen in their silent vigil. The fog curled against the walls, pressing softly against my ears, reminding me I was alone and yet not. The hallway was silent, only the hum of distant lights brushing against the walls. I reached the elevator. Its doors were pale, metal cold under my fingers. They opened slowly, not to another floor, but a wall of fog, thick and heavy, swallowing the small cabin whole. I stepped in. The air smelled damp and faintly metallic. Buttons flickered on their own, light jumping like static across floors that didn't exist. The elevator shivered under me, soft, almost imperceptible, but enough to feel the press of something, a presence, against my back, wrapping the air tightly around my chest. I tried the buttons. They didn't stay lit. Floors disappeared as quickly as I imagined them. A hollow hum vibrated through the metal walls, pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I couldn't move my eyes from the fog. It swirled inside the elevator, touching my skin, damp and cold, making me shiver. A whisper brushed my ear. Or maybe the fog pressed it there. I couldn't tell if it was sound or breath. I leaned forward. The walls felt too close, shifting, bending, as if the elevator itself had memory, remembering shapes that weren't mine. I pressed the buttons again. All flickered, some glowing with pale light, then gone in a blink. The floor numbers made no sense. They counted down, then up, then vanished altogether. The fog pressed more tightly. I could feel shadows brushing my arms, or perhaps just the air twisting in unnatural ways. The elevator smelled faintly of old stone and wet linen. Cold seeped through my sleeves. My breath caught in my throat. A flicker of something moved behind the glass doors. I blinked. Nothing. Only fog. Only the soft vibration of that unseen presence. Pushing, shifting, watching. The cabin lights dimmed. The hum grew louder, echoing from every corner, then fading, leaving silence heavy and close. My fingertips traced the walls, metal, solid, yet alive somehow, trembling beneath my touch. I stepped back, heart thudding against the fog. I tried the doors. They didn't open, only the soft press of air against me, folding around my body, as if the elevator itself had lungs. The buttons blinked one final time. A single floor glowed, then disappeared before I could press it. The fog thickened, swallowing even the dim light. The hum returned, lower now, like breathing from somewhere just out of reach. I exhaled slowly. The elevator trembled slightly, then nothing. No floors, no buttons, only fog. I leaned against the wall. The air clung to my skin, damp, cold, and I realized the presence wasn't moving away. It was here, always here. The doors closed. Or maybe they didn't. I could no longer tell. Only the fog remained and the soft, impossible hum pressing against me from all sides. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped into the first hallway, and it stretched farther than it should. Pale light flickered above, casting long shadows that didn't match the walls. The carpet muffled my steps, but the silence pressed in, heavy and unnatural. I reached the door. It opened into a room I recognized, though I hadn't seen it in this building before. The air smelled faintly of old wood and dust. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me, almost without sound. When I tried the next door, it led to the same room again. I backed out. The hallway had changed. Longer now, and narrower. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding slightly, then shrinking back. Soft rustling came from the corners. I couldn't tell if it was fabric moving or something brushing against the wall. The air was damp, like fog had seeped in from some distant night. I swallowed hard. Each step felt heavier, as if the floor itself was resisting. I turned a corner. The door there led back to the first room. I paused. The familiar hum of electricity filled the hallway. It shouldn't have. It felt wrong. Static clung to the air, itching against my skin. I walked slowly, fingertips grazing the walls. Cold metal, polished with some surfaces felt warmer than they should. Shadows moved in ways I couldn't predict. I blinked. The hallway stretched farther. The doors shifted. I had no idea which way led out. I stopped at a door. It opened onto the same room again. The air smelled faintly of wax and paper, of something burning long ago. I tried to remember how I got here. I couldn't. The memory felt like fog. Footsteps echoed behind me. Soft, deliberate, but when I turned, nothing was there. Just the endless hallways, stretching into pale light that didn't reach the ceiling. I walked and walked. The silence pressed harder. Each door I opened led back to the same place. The walls hummed faintly. I could feel it vibrating through the soles of my shoes. A breeze brushed my neck. I spun. Empty hallway. Empty room. Only the sensation lingered, like a ghost of wind in a forgotten building. I tried call out. My voice echoed, but the sound twisted into itself. It didn't bounce back. It folded into the walls. Even my own words became alien. The hallway curved impossibly. A faint rustling followed my movements. Or maybe it preceded them. I couldn't tell. Each door led me back to the same room, with the same pale light and the same heavy silence. I leaned against the wall. Cold, smooth metal. I felt my breath in my chest. The hum of the building filled my ears. I realized the hallway had no end, and the rooms had no number. I walked again. The doors, the walls, the light, all repeating. I was alone, and yet not. I felt eyes pressing from the corners, watching, waiting. I stopped listening. The rustling faded. The hum softened. The silence settled around me, thick and suffocating. I exhaled slowly. I didn't know how long I had been here, or if I ever could leave. The hallway stretched on, and I walked, and the doors waited, always the same, always silent. The hallway stretched out under a low, humming ceiling. Fluorescent bulbs pulsed softly, casting brief bursts of pale light. In the blink between flashes, figures appeared, standing, waiting, fading before I could focus. I breathed slowly, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but the smell of damp plaster and cold metal made the air feel heavier with each pulse. The walls shifted with shadows. Thin, elongated shapes crawling along the molding. They flickered in rhythm with the lights, as though the building itself was breathing. I stepped forward. The floor hummed faintly beneath my shoes, resonating up through my spine. Each step brought a flicker, and with it, another figure, always just at the edge of my vision. I leaned against the wall. Cold, smooth, almost wet to the touch. A shadow passed over my hand, moving in ways my eyes couldn't track. It paused. I could feel its presence lingering, like the brush of a whisper against my ear. The lights stuttered. The corridor stretched longer in the darkness. I caught glimpses of figure at the far end, tall, thin, perfectly still, then gone. Only the echo of a soft footfall remained. I blinked, and the walls had changed. A door appeared where there was none. Another door vanished entirely. The lights pulsed again. Shadows danced across the ceiling, bending, twisting, taunting with impossible movements. I stepped closer to the door that had appeared. The handle was cold, leaving a faint metallic scent on my fingertips. I hesitated. The light blinked, and the figure stood in the threshold, then vanished. The hallway seemed endless, lights flickering in a slow, rhythmic pulse. Figures appeared and disappeared. I could feel their eyes brushing me from every corner, yet I saw no one. The hum from above grew louder, a vibration in the floor. I pressed my palm to the wall. It was vibrating too, like the building itself was alive. I turned down a side corridor. The lights blinked in succession, revealing fragments of rooms I didn't recognize. A chair half-turned. A window, fogged, reflected my face, but delayed. I moved, and the reflection lagged, still staring after me. I froze. The pulse of the light slowed. Shadows hung longer. Figures appeared closer now, yet retreating every time I blinked. A soft rustling followed me. I could feel it moving beneath my skin, a whisper I couldn't place. The hallway twisted again. The lights flickered faster, and with each pulse, the figures multiplied, stretching along the walls and ceiling. They didn't move naturally. They shifted like smoke, taunting, mocking. I swallowed hard. The air felt thicker, stale with something unspoken. I tried to take another step, but the floor beneath my feet seemed to pulse with each blink. I exhaled slowly. The light slowed. The figures receded into the corners. The shadows returned to the walls, still, silent, watching. I kept walking. The flicker continued, a soft, rhythmic beat in the quiet corridor. The hallway stretched before me, and the figures lingered, always just at the edge of the light. I walked, and the building watched. The corridor was quiet. Thick fog clung to the edges of the walls, softening the glow from the pale ceiling lights. I walked slowly. Each step pressed into the worn carpet, a faint rustle under my shoes. The air smelled faintly of old wax and damp wood. And then I noticed it, a figure beside me, translucent, moving just like me, but wrong. Its steps were lighter, almost floating, its outline blurred with every blink. It mirrored my hands, my turns, even my pauses. I breathed carefully. The hum of the lights above thrummed softly through my chest. Its eyes, if it had eyes, were empty, reflecting nothing but the hall's faint glow. I turned a corner. It turned exactly the same way, though I knew I hadn't moved that quickly. The air thickened, clinging to my skin like misty fingers. I wanted to speak, but my voice felt swallowed by the corridor. Instead, I just watched. Its form flickered, sometimes more solid, sometimes nearly gone, like smoke caught in a breeze. I moved faster. It matched me perfectly. There was no hesitation, no glance, only imitation. The walls seemed to lean inward. Shadows deepened at the edges of the lights. I could hear soft whispers, like fabric brushing against itself, or footsteps in a room I had just passed. The figure paused when I paused. It stretched when I stretched. A soft chill traveled along my spine. Its presence was close now, a breath of cold in the warm corridor. I reached out my hand, half to touch, half to push away. It moved simultaneously. Our fingers aligned perfectly for a heartbeat. Then its form flickered, and the moment was gone. I kept walking. The hallway stretched longer than it should. The lights pulsed softly in rhythm with my heartbeat. Each flicker revealed it standing there, always beside me, always following, but never quite real. I leaned against the wall. The texture of old paint and dust scratched lightly against my palm. I smelled something faintly metallic, iron or rust. The figure mimicked that too, tilting its head in the same slow arc. I wondered if it could feel anything, or if it was only a shadow of me, a reflection with no reflection of its own. The air hummed with quiet tension, thick with unspoken words. I stepped into a wider room. The figure mirrored me perfectly. It lingered a second too long when I stopped, a pause pregnant with something unnameable. Then it shifted, almost gliding across the floor to maintain the perfect imitation. I exhaled slowly. The corridor beyond seemed to breathe with me, lights flickering in gentle pulses. The figure paused at the far end of the room. I blinked, and it vanished, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air. The room smelled faintly of paper and cold stone. I ran a hand along the wall. The sensation of dust, of age, of time grounded me slightly, but the memory of its presence lingered. I moved forward cautiously, each step measured, careful. The lights pulsed, the shadows stretched, and for a moment I could feel it again, just behind me, breathing with the same quiet rhythm, a silent guest in the pale, echoing hall. The lobby stretched farther than I could see. The ceiling shimmered with pale, shifting light. The air smelled faintly of varnish and cold stone. Chairs floated just above the ground. They twisted slowly, turning to face walls that weren't there before. The carpet felt soft beneath my feet, yet hollow, almost weightless. I stepped closer to the front desk. It whispered, soft promises, words I couldn't understand. Each phrase seemed to curl around my ears, slipping between comprehension and the edge of fear. A faint hum pulsed through the marble floor. The glow of the chandeliers fractured in the fog that crept along the edges. I could feel static brushing my skin, like the lobby itself was breathing. I walked. The hallway beyond the desk seemed to stretch endlessly. Every turn led back to the same impossibly long room. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. Chairs floated past me. One tilted, scraping the marble ever so lightly. The sound echoed, soft, hollow, unnerving. I realized the shadows were moving differently than their owners, curling and leaning toward me. The whispers grew more insistent. I couldn't make the words out, only the sense that they were calling me, pulling me forward through the fog. I reached for a chair. It slid aside before my fingers touched it, leaving only a cold, empty space. A faint metallic smell lingered in the air. I drew back, feeling the hum thrum through the floorboards. The lights flickered, revealing glimpses of corners that weren't there a moment ago. Shadows twisted along the walls, sometimes following me, sometimes darting ahead, disappearing into the endless space. I paused near the center of the lobby. A chill ran along my spine. The whispers swirled louder, curling like smoke around my ears. Yet when I focused, they faded, leaving only a dense, unnatural silence. The fog shifted under the chandeliers. I saw a reflection of myself, or maybe it was not me. It lingered in the polished floor like liquid shadow, staying just out of reach of reality. I moved again. The front desk shifted slightly, its surface undulating. It whispered again, promises I could feel rather than understand, promises that pressed against my mind like soft fingertips. The chairs rose and fell gently, as if breathing in rhythm with the lobby itself. I realized there was no sound of my own footsteps, only the movement of the room, the soft rustling of invisible fabrics brushing past. The walls stretched and shrank with each blink. A hum vibrated through the air, low and constant, like a heartbeat I couldn't locate. I could feel it in my bones, pulling me deeper into the endless space. I leaned against the wall. The cold surface grounded me, but the lobby seemed to ripple beneath my hand. A faint scent of paper and dampness drifted from nowhere. The whispers lingered still, never loud, never fully gone. I took a slow breath. The pale lights shimmered and trembled. The lobby went on forever, and I was small, alone, moving through a space that might have been alive. Every corner led back to the same impossible center. The fog wrapped around me, soft and insistent. Chairs floated past one last time, and the whispers settled into silence, leaving only the hum of the endless lobby and the faint brush of my own breath against the fog. I stepped out of the hotel. The world was swallowed by fog. It pressed against my skin, damp and cold, wrapping me in silence. The doors closed behind me, their echoes swallowed immediately. I thought I heard footsteps trailing, but each step faded before it reached me. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and distant smoke. A soft hum lingered, like the memory of the hotel breathing behind me. I turned. Nothing but white mist. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision. I blinked and they vanished. Yet I felt eyes, watching, following, though no one was there. The fog clung to my clothes, weighing softly, almost like hands. Each breath felt heavier than the last, as if the mist was pressing into my lungs. I walked. The ground was muffled, the gravel soft underfoot. The horizon was gone, the sky melting into the whiteness. Even the sounds of distant traffic, of life, were gone. Behind me, I thought I heard whispers, just beyond hearing, curling around my ears like smoke. But when I paused, the fog swallowed all trace of them. The hotel loomed faintly behind me, its windows dark, doors closed, waiting silently in the mist. The structure seemed familiar and impossible at once, as if it had grown into the fog itself. I felt the fog shift, rippling with subtle motion, like the air had weight, like it was aware of me. A cold breeze brushed my neck, though no wind stirred. I stepped further. Footsteps continued to fade behind me. Each step I took echoed softly, then vanished into nothing. The mist smelled faintly of damp wood, like rooms I had left behind, like the echoes of chairs, of doors, of whispers. I shivered. The cold was not from the air. It was from knowing the hotel would wait forever. I paused, breathing in the pale wetness. The fog made every shape uncertain. A tree, a signpost, perhaps a person, all melted back into the white. I reached out with my hands. The mist slipped through my fingers like water. I felt the weight of the emptiness, and a strange calm settled into my chest. The hotel silhouette lingered faintly behind me, its presence quiet, patient. I walked further into the fog, each step soft, alone measured. I could hear nothing now but the subtle brush of the mist against my skin, my clothes, my hair. The world had narrowed to a single point. Me, the fog, the endless whiteness. And I realized I was not afraid. The fog would hold me. The hotel would wait. Alone, yes, but not lost. I took a final slow breath. The mist swallowed me entirely, and I moved forward into the quiet, into the soft, endless embrace of the fog.